Chapter 1. The Trip. Lucas Nicholson zipped the last compartment of his carry-on and set it upright beside the bed. The soft click of the zipper echoed in the bedroom, louder than it should have been. He stood there for a moment, staring at the bag as if it belonged to someone else. 3 days. That was all the trip was supposed to take. Chicago. A client presentation. A hotel near the river. Routine. Predictable. Safe. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, catching his reflection in the dresser mirror. At 38, Lucas still carried himself like the Marine he used to be, straight-backed, shoulders squared, movements economical. The discipline never really left you. You just learned how to wear it under civilian clothes. Behind him, Deborah sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone. She hadn't looked up once. "You're taking the early flight?" she asked absently. 6 a.m., Lucas replied. "I'll be back Thursday night." That was it. "No, I'll miss you." No drive safe. No kiss. The distance between them wasn't measured in feet anymore. It was measured in silences like this one. Lucas walked to the closet, checking his suits. He already knew everything was packed, but old habits died hard. Control what you can. Verify. Never assume. Deborah finally glanced up. "Don't forget the blue folder. The contracts are in there." "I've got it," he said. She nodded and went back to her phone. Lucas hesitated, then spoke anyway. "You okay?" Deborah stiffened almost imperceptibly. "I'm fine." He waited. She didn't elaborate. Lately, fine was the only answer he ever got. He'd noticed the signs months ago. Bills arriving late. Debit alerts at odd hours. Deborah stepping outside to take calls and lowering her voice when he walked past. She blamed inflation. Stress. Her mother needing help. Always something. Never details. And then there was Constance. Lucas's jaw tightened at the thought of his mother-in-law. Constance had moved to town 6 months earlier, temporarily. Temporarily had turned into spare keys, unannounced visits, and opinions about everything from how Emma was being raised to how Lucas worked too much. "She's just trying to help," Deborah always said. Lucas didn't argue anymore. He just watched. He slung the carry-on handle up and rolled it toward the door. As he passed the hallway, he heard the soft shuffle of feet. "Daddy." Emma stood at the doorway of her room in pink pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit so tightly its ear was bent in half. Her hair was tangled from sleep, dark curls framing a face still soft with childhood. Lucas smiled automatically. "Hey, Peanut, what are you doing up?" She looked at the bag. Her smile vanished. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "For a couple days," he said gently. "I told you, remember? Daddy's got a work trip." Her lower lip trembled. She stepped closer, eyes locked on the bag like it was dangerous. "No," she whispered. Lucas knelt in front of her. "Hey, it's okay. I'll be back before you know it." Emma shook her head hard. "Don't go." Deborah appeared in the hallway, phone still in hand. "Emma, sweetie, Daddy has to work." Emma ignored her. She grabbed Lucas's sleeve with both hands, fingers digging in. "Please, don't go." Something in her voice made Lucas's smile fade. "Why?" he asked softly. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the living room, then back to him. Her grip tightened. "Bad things happen when you're gone." The words hit him like a cold splash of water. Lucas searched her face for signs of exaggeration. Kids imagine monsters. They feared shadows. That was normal. This wasn't that. Her breathing was fast. Her eyes were wet, not with tantrum tears, but something deeper, fear she didn't have the language to explain. "What bad things, sweetheart?" he asked. She shook her head again. "I don't know. I feel it." Deborah scoffed lightly. "Emma, you're scaring yourself. Grandma said it's normal to feel nervous when parents travel." Emma flinched at the word grandma. Lucas noticed. He straightened slowly, still holding Emma's hands. "Deb, give us a minute." Deborah frowned. "Lucas, please." After a moment, she sighed and walked back into the bedroom. Lucas crouched again, lowering his voice. "Emma, look at me." She did. "When Daddy's gone," he said carefully. "Has something happened before?" She hesitated, then shook her head. Not yet." His chest tightened. "Has anyone scared you?" Her eyes flicked toward the front door, toward the world beyond it. "Grandma Constance doesn't like you," Emma whispered. Lucas felt a flicker of anger, sharp and immediate. Why do you think that? She says you leave because you don't want us, Emma said. She says you're not here to protect me. The room seemed to shrink. Lucas swallowed. That's not true. I would never, I know, Emma said quickly. But she says bad things when you're gone. His pulse picked up. What kind of bad things? Emma's grip loosened, then tightened again. I don't want to say. Lucas brushed a curl away from her face. You can always tell me. You know that. She leaned into him, pressing her forehead against his chest. Just don't go. Please. Lucas wrapped his arms around her, feeling how small she was. How easily she fit against him. How fragile everything suddenly felt. I'll call you every night, he said. We'll do bedtime stories on FaceTime. She shook her head again, harder this time. That's not enough. Deborah's voice came from the bedroom. Lucas, you're going to miss dinner. Lucas didn't respond. His mind was racing now, instincts stirring awake from a long sleep. Something was off. Not dramatic, not obvious, but wrong in a way that made the air feel heavier. He stood, lifting Emma into his arms. She clung to him like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. I promise you, he said quietly, mostly to himself, I'll keep you safe. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes searched his face with a seriousness no 7-year-old should have to carry. Then stay, she whispered. Lucas looked past her, down the hallway, toward the bedroom where his wife waited, toward the front door, toward the bag. 3 days. Routine. Predictable. Safe. That was what he'd thought. Emma pressed her face into his shoulder again and whispered the words that stayed with him long after the house went quiet. Bad things happen when you're gone. Chapter 2. A Child's Warning. Lucas didn't sleep. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling fan as it traced slow circles above him, the whisper of its blades slicing through the quiet. Emma's words replayed over and over in his head, each time carrying more weight. Bad things happen when you're gone. At some point near dawn, he heard movement down the hall. Small footsteps. Careful ones. Lucas rolled out of bed and opened the door just as Emma padded past, clutching her rabbit again. Her eyes widened when she saw him, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Hey, he said softly. Couldn't sleep either? She shook her head. He crouched. Come here. She hesitated, then walked straight into his arms. Lucas lifted her, feeling how light she was, how tense. Her small body didn't relax against him the way it usually did. He carried her into the kitchen. Morning light crept through the blinds, pale and uncertain. Lucas set her on the counter and poured her a glass of milk, sliding it toward her. Talk to me, he said gently. About yesterday. Emma stared at the milk, tracing the rim of the glass with one finger. I don't like when you go away. I know, Lucas said, but this feels like more than that. She shrugged, a small, helpless movement. It's just wrong. Wrong how? She searched for the answer, brow furrowed, in concentration. Like when you know a storm is coming, even if it's still sunny. Lucas felt a chill crawl up his spine. Does something happen when I'm gone? He asked carefully. Anything different? Emma shook her head. Not always. But Grandma Constance comes over more. Lucas kept his voice steady. What happens when she's here? Emma bit her lip. She watches me. Ow, just watches, Emma said, eyes flicking toward the hallway like Constance might be standing there. And she tells Mommy things in whispers. What kind of things? Emma lowered her voice instinctively. About you. Lucas leaned in. What does she say? That you don't care, Emma whispered. That you're not really part of the family. That you'd leave us if something better came along. Lucas felt something inside him crack, not loudly, but deep. Did she say anything else? He asked. Emma nodded, tears welling now. She says you can't protect me if you're not here. Lucas closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his jaw was clenched. Emma, he said quietly, has Grandma ever hurt you? Emma shook her head quickly. No, she just makes me scared. That answer worried him more than any bruise ever could. Deborah entered the kitchen moments later, tying her robe closed. What's going on? Emma had trouble sleeping, Lucas said. Deborah sighed. Again, Emma slid off the counter and pressed against Lucas's leg. Lucas straightened. Deborah, she's scared. Deborah poured herself coffee, not looking at them. She's a child, Lucas. Kids get scared. They imagine things. She's not imagining fear like this, Lucas said. She's trying to tell us something. Deborah turned sharply. Are you seriously suggesting my mother is doing something to her? I'm saying Emma is afraid of her. Deborah scoffed. Constance babysat half the kids in her neighborhood growing up. She adores Emma. Emma flinched at the name again. Lucas noticed. Deborah didn't. Lucas knelt beside his daughter. Emma, does Grandma ever tell you not to tell Daddy things? Emma hesitated. Deborah's eyes narrowed. Emma. Lucas shot his wife a warning look. Let her answer. Emma nodded slowly. She says secrets are okay if they are for the family. The room went very still. Deborah laughed nervously. That's nothing. She probably meant surprises. Emma shook her head. She said, Daddy wouldn't understand. Lucas stood. His voice stayed calm, but it was iron hard beneath the surface. Deborah, that's not normal. You're overreacting, Deborah snapped. You've been distant for months. Maybe Emma's picking up on that. Lucas stared at her. So this is my fault? I'm saying you're projecting, Deborah said. You leave. She misses you. End of story. Lucas looked down at Emma. She was gripping his pant leg like it was a lifeline. Go get dressed for school, sweetheart, he said gently. I'll be there in a minute. Emma hesitated, then nodded and walked down the hall, glancing back twice before disappearing into her room. The moment she was gone, Lucas turned to Deborah. You're not listening, he said. Deborah crossed her arms. Because there's nothing to listen to. Your daughter is afraid in her own home. She's 7. She's terrified, Lucas corrected. And she's not wrong about how things feel. Deborah's face hardened. This is about my mother, isn't it? This is about Emma, Lucas said. And about you brushing off her fear because it's inconvenient. Deborah's voice rose. You think you know better than everyone? You're gone half the time. Lucas stepped closer. And I make sure when I'm gone, my family is safe. Deborah laughed bitterly. From what? Ghosts? Lucas didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to. Later, as he drove Emma to school, she sat quietly in the back seat, eyes fixed on the window. Lucas watched her reflection in the rearview mirror. Hey, he said, you did the right thing telling me. She nodded faintly. I believe you, he added. Her eyes met his in the mirror, relief flickering across her face. Promise? She asked. I promise, Lucas said. When he dropped her off, she hugged him longer than usual, arms wrapped tight around his neck. Don't forget, she whispered. Please. Lucas watched her walk inside, then sat in the car long after the doors closed. This wasn't anxiety. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't coincidence. Something was happening in his house when he wasn't there. And whatever it was, he could feel it now, pressing in, coiled and patient. Lucas started the engine, his decision settling heavy and absolute in his chest. He could not leave Emma unprotected. Chapter 3, The Lie. Lucas canceled the trip at 9:12 a.m. He stood in his truck in the parking lot across from his office building, phone pressed to his ear, eyes fixed on nothing. The client's assistant spoke, brightly on the other end, apologetic but efficient. No problem at all, Mr. Nicholson. We'll reschedule for next month. Thank you, Lucas said. His voice sounded steady. It didn't feel that way. He ended the call and set the phone down on the passenger seat. For a long moment, he just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly through his nose the way he'd been trained to do years ago when panic was a liability. This was the first time he'd ever canceled a work trip without a real excuse. More importantly, it was the first time he wasn't going to tell his wife. The realization settled in his chest, heavy and final. Lucas pulled out of the lot and drove home instead of to the airport. The radio played softly, some forgettable talk show filling the silence. His thoughts stayed sharp, ordered, lining themselves up the way they always did when something felt wrong. Identify the threat. Control the variables. Protect the innocent. He parked a block away from the house instead of in the driveway. Old habit. He didn't know why he'd done it until he'd already cut the engine. Inside, the house was quiet. Deborah had gone to work. Emma was at school. The stillness felt different now, less peaceful, more watchful. Lucas set his bag by the door, untouched. Then he went to the kitchen table and opened his laptop. His flight confirmation was still open in his inbox. He forwarded it to Deborah's email with a simple line typed beneath it. Boarding now. Call you tonight. He stared at the message before hitting send. This was the lie. The first deliberate one he'd ever told her. His finger hovered, then pressed the key. The email vanished into cyberspace, and with it, the last easy version of his life. Lucas closed the laptop and stood. His pulse had picked up, but his mind felt oddly clear. Focused. He walked through the house slowly, room by room, seeing it differently now. Entry points, sight lines, blind spots, the back window that never quite latched right, the hallway corner where shadows gathered in the evening. He stopped in the living room and looked at the family photos on the wall. Emma on his shoulders at the zoo. Deborah smiling stiffly beside him at a company dinner. Constance in the background of one photo, hand on Emma's shoulder, her smile thin and sharp. Lucas turned away. He went to the garage and pulled down the box he hadn't opened since moving in. The one labeled tools in black marker. Inside were drills, cables, mounts, and the compact surveillance kit he'd bought months earlier and never installed. At the time, he told himself it was paranoia, a Marine's bad habit of expecting danger where there was none. Now it felt like foresight. He carried the box inside and laid everything out on the dining table. His movements were precise, methodical. No wasted motion. The way his hands knew what to do without needing instructions. By noon, the first camera was mounted discreetly above the front door, angled to capture faces without being obvious. Another went in the living room corner, hidden behind a decorative plant. A third in the hallway, positioned to see every bedroom door without being seen itself. He paused outside Emma's room. The door was covered in stickers, stars, animals, crooked letters spelling her name. Lucas rested his palm against the wood for a moment, then installed the smallest camera inside the smoke detector casing near the ceiling. It was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though no one could hear him. By the time Emma got home, everything looked exactly the same. That was the point. Lucas met her at the door with a smile, lifting her backpack off her shoulders. "How was school?" She shrugged. "Okay." He knelt. "Everything okay?" She studied his face carefully. "You're still here." "Just got back early," he said lightly. "Thought I'd surprise you." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. Deborah came home an hour later, heels clicking across the tile. "I thought you'd be at the airport," she said, surprised. "Flight's delayed." Lucas replied without missing a beat. "I'll head out later." Deborah frowned. "You didn't tell me." He shrugged. "Didn't want to wake you." She studied him for a second too long, then looked away. "Well, Mom's coming by tonight." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Tonight?" "She wants to check on Emma," Deborah said. "Since you're leaving." "I'm still leaving," Lucas said evenly. Deborah nodded, satisfied. "Good." That word stayed with him long after she walked away. That evening, after Emma was asleep and Deborah had retreated to the bedroom with her phone, Lucas stepped out onto the back porch and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It rang twice. "Lucas." Scott's voice came through, surprised and warm. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Lucas said. "Mostly." There was a pause. Scott knew him too well to miss the tone. "That doesn't sound like mostly." "I need a favor," Lucas said. "No questions yet." "Okay. How about a work trip?" Lucas said carefully. "Or I'm supposed to. I need you to be nearby for a few days." "Just around." Scott exhaled slowly. "What's going on?" "I don't know," Lucas said honestly. "But my daughter's scared. And I don't like the reason." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll be there tonight," Scott said. "Text me the address." "Don't come to the house," Lucas said. "Just close enough." "Got it." Lucas ended the call and leaned against the railing, staring out into the dark yard. The wind stirred the trees, leaves rustling like quiet whispers. Inside, his phone buzzed. A message from Deborah. "Don't forget to call Emma before bed tomorrow." Lucas typed back immediately. "I won't." He slipped the phone into his pocket and stood there until the night air cooled the heat in his chest. He was lying to his wife, watching his own house, preparing for something he couldn't yet name. But one truth stood clear above everything else. Whatever was happening, whatever Emma felt, whatever Deborah wasn't saying, Lucas wasn't walking away from it. He had committed now, and he would discover the truth, whatever it was. Chapter 4, Constance's Shadow. Constance arrived just after 7, right on schedule. Lucas heard her before he saw her. The firm knock, sharp and authoritative, like she expected the door to open immediately. Deborah glanced up from the couch, already tense. "That'll be my mother," she said, standing. "She just wants to see Emma before you leave." Lucas nodded but didn't move. He stayed where he was, arms crossed, watching. Deborah opened the door with a practiced smile. "Mom." Constance swept in without waiting for an invitation, wrapped in a long beige coat despite the mild evening. Her hair was perfectly set, silver and immovable, her lipstick precise. Her eyes flicked past Deborah and landed on Lucas. "Well," she said, voice cool and appraising, "you're still here." "Flight delay," Lucas replied. A thin smile crossed her face. "Of course." She stepped fully inside, already removing her coat, already at home. Lucas noticed how naturally she moved through the space, as if she were the one who belonged here, as if the house bent slightly around her presence. "Where's my girl?" Constance asked. "In her room," Deborah said. "She's finishing homework." Constance didn't wait. She headed down the hallway, heels clicking sharply against the floor. Lucas followed. Emma was seated at her small desk, coloring quietly. She looked up when Constance entered and immediately shrank back in her chair. Lucas saw it clearly this time. The way her shoulders tensed, the way her hand curled protectively around her rabbit. "There she is," Constance said brightly. "Grandma missed you." Emma forced a smile. "Hi, Grandma." Constance bent down, gripping the back of Emma's chair instead of hugging her. "Your father told me he's leaving again." Lucas stiffened. "It's a short trip." "Still," Constance said, straightening. "A man who's always gone." "That's enough," Lucas said calmly. Constance's eyes sharpened. "Excuse me, you don't talk about me like that to my daughter." Deborah appeared in the doorway. "Lucas, please." Constance sighed theatrically. "I'm only telling the truth. Children deserve honesty." Emma's eyes flicked between the adults, wide and uncertain. Lucas knelt beside her. "Emma, go wash up for dinner." She hesitated, then slid off the chair and hurried past him, brushing his arm as she went. Her fingers lingered just a second longer than necessary. Lucas stood slowly. "We need to talk," he said to Constance. Constance smiled. "Oh, about what?" "About boundaries." Deborah laughed nervously. "This isn't necessary." "It is," Lucas said. Constance tilted her head. "You always were sensitive, Lucas. Military men often are. So much control in the field, so little at home." Lucas felt the insult land, deliberate and measured. "I'm not discussing this in front of my daughter," he said. "Or ever again." Constance stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're leaving. That's what matters. Deborah and I will take care of things." The word take lingered unpleasantly in the air. Lucas glanced down the hallway. Emma hadn't gone far. He could feel her listening. "Emma needs stability," Lucas said. "Not whispers and half-truths." Constance's smile thinned. "Stability doesn't come from a father who's never present." Deborah raised her voice. "Mom, stop." But she didn't sound convincing. Not to Lucas. Dinner passed under a heavy cloud. Constance sat at the head of the table, speaking for Deborah, answering questions that weren't directed at her. She corrected Emma gently, but constantly, how she held her fork, how she pronounced certain words. Lucas watched Emma grow quieter with every passing minute. "Eat up," Constance said. "You need to be strong." Emma pushed food around her plate. "I'm not hungry." Constance frowned. "Nonsense." Lucas set his fork down. She said she's not hungry. Constance looked at him, surprised, then smiled again. "You're spoiling her." "No," Lucas said. "I'm listening to her." Emma looked up at him, eyes shining briefly before dropping again. After dinner, Constance lingered, sitting too close to Deborah, whispering in her ear. Lucas caught fragments. "Can't rely on him. Money doesn't stretch forever. You know what we discussed." Lucas pretended not to hear, but his pulse quickened. When Constance finally stood to leave, she bent down to Emma's level. "I'll be here while Daddy's gone," she said softly. "You won't be alone." Emma's face drained of color. Lucas stepped forward. "That's enough." Constance straightened, unfazed. "She needs reassurance. She doesn't need fear disguised as comfort." Lucas said. Constance's eyes hardened. You think you know what fear is? Lucas met her gaze. I do. The silence stretched until Deborah cleared her throat. Mom, I'll walk you out. Lucas watched from the hallway as Constance put on her coat, murmuring something Lucas couldn't hear. Deborah nodded along, eyes downcast. When the door finally closed, the house felt emptier and somehow more crowded at the same time. Emma came out of her room, slowly. Is she gone? Yes, Lucas said. She's gone. Emma ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. He rested his chin on her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, steadying himself. She doesn't like you, Emma whispered. I know, Lucas said, but that's not your problem. She says you won't be here to stop bad things. Lucas's chest tightened. I'm always here. She didn't answer. Later, after Emma was asleep, Lucas stood alone in the living room. The cameras were live now, silent witnesses tucked into corners and ceilings. He pulled up the feed on his phone and watched the empty hallway, the closed bedroom doors, the front entrance. The house did feel different. Not dangerous yet, not openly hostile, but watchful. He thought back to moments he'd brushed aside. Deborah deferring to her mother on decisions that should have been theirs alone. Constance showing up unannounced. Emma growing quieter after visits. The unexplained expenses. The whispers. Pieces he'd ignored because acknowledging them meant confronting something ugly. Lucas shut off the screen and slipped the phone into his pocket. He stood there for a long time, listening to the house settle around him, feeling the weight of the choice he'd already made. He would pretend to leave, and he would see what happened. Chapter 5, Alone in the Basement. Lucas left at 6:05 p.m., right on time. He kissed Emma on the forehead, longer than usual, and she clung to his jacket as if she could anchor him to the floor. Her eyes were rimmed red, her mouth pressed into a thin line she was trying very hard to hold together. You'll call, she asked. As soon as I land, Lucas said, forcing a smile. And tomorrow night, and the night after that. She nodded, but her fingers tightened in his sleeve. Daddy, she whispered, so softly Deborah couldn't hear. Please come back. Lucas swallowed. I will. He straightened, lifted his carry-on, and turned toward the door. Deborah stood near the kitchen island, arms folded, watching with a careful neutrality that felt rehearsed. Safe flight, she said. Always, Lucas replied. Constance wasn't there. That fact lodged in his mind like a splinter. At the door, Lucas paused and looked back one last time. Emma stood frozen in the hallway, rabbit tucked under her arm, watching him like she was memorizing his face. He raised his hand. She lifted hers in return, slow and reluctant. Then he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. The click of the lock sounded final. Lucas walked to the driveway, set the bag into the trunk, and closed it deliberately. He got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. At the corner, he turned off the headlights and cut the engine. The house sat dark and quiet behind him. He waited 3 minutes. Then he got out, retrieved the bag, and slipped through the side gate, moving low and silent, counting his steps like he used on night patrols. The back door opened with the soft scrape he'd memorized years ago. He was inside again before the porch light could cool. The basement stairs creaked, but only once. Lucas knew exactly where to place his feet. Downstairs, the air was cooler and smelled faintly of concrete and dust. He shut the door quietly behind him and flicked on a small lamp. The space was unfinished, exposed beams, stacked boxes, an old workbench pushed against the wall. He set his bag down and pulled out his laptop and tablet, connecting them to the camera feeds. One by one, the screens came alive. Front door, living room, hallway, Emma's bedroom door, backyard. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Lucas sat on the old folding chair, elbows on his knees, eyes moving constantly. He checked the time. 6:42 p.m. upstairs. The sound of plates clinking echoed faintly through the floorboards. Dinner. He could almost picture it. Deborah moving through the kitchen, the rhythm of a routine she knew by heart. Emma sitting quietly, saying little. Lucas's chest tightened. He resisted the urge to go back up. This was the hardest part, doing nothing. At 7:15, Deborah's phone buzzed on the coffee table. Lucas watched her glance at it, then at the hallway, then back at the phone. She typed a response and set it down face first. At 7:30, Emma went to her room. She paused in the hallway, looking toward the front door. Lucas leaned closer to the screen, heart thudding. She didn't cry. That somehow made it worse. At 8:00, Deborah entered the bedroom and shut the door. The house settled. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It pressed in, thick and unnatural, like the air before a storm. Lucas checked his phone. No messages. He didn't expect any. He leaned back and closed his eyes for just a moment. Images flickered behind his lids. Emma's face when he'd left, Constance's smile, the way Deborah had avoided his eyes. Maybe nothing will happen, a hopeful voice whispered. Another voice answered immediately, cold and precise. Then you'll know. At 9:10, the hallway camera flickered briefly. Lucas straightened, muscles coiling. Nothing followed. At 9:45, Deborah walked into the living room and paced slowly. Phone pressed to her ear. Lucas couldn't hear the conversation, but her posture told a story, tense shoulders, clipped movements, frequent glances toward Emma's room. She lowered her voice and turned her back to the camera. Lucas's jaw tightened. At 10:15, Deborah hung up and stood very still in the center of the living room. For a long moment, she didn't move at all. Then she smoothed her hair, squared her shoulders, and walked to the front door. She checked the lock. Once. Twice. Then she turned off the porch light. Lucas exhaled slowly through his nose. This wasn't bedtime routine. This was preparation. He glanced at the time. 10:27 p.m. upstairs. The house seemed to hold its breath. Lucas adjusted the angle on the hallway camera, magnifying the image. Every shadow looked sharper now. Every dark corner felt intentional. He flexed his hands, then forced them to relax. Stay calm. Stay still. At 10:40, Emma's bedroom light clicked off. Lucas leaned forward, so far his elbows dug into his knees. He whispered into the quiet basement. I'm here, kiddo. The words felt fragile. 10:52, the refrigerator hummed upstairs. Pipes shifted, the normal noises of a house settling for the night, but they felt amplified, distorted by anticipation. Lucas checked the doors again. Locked. All of them. He thought about the lie he'd told, the flight he hadn't taken, the trust he'd broken. If nothing happened tonight, he would have to live with that. If something did, his thoughts cut off before he could finish them. He glanced at the clock again. 10:58 p.m., Lucas's heartbeat slowed, his focus sharpening into something razor-thin. This was the edge of it now, the moment where hope and dread balanced perfectly, neither willing to give ground. The basement felt smaller, the air heavier. Upstairs, Deborah moved once more, crossing the living room slowly, deliberately, as if counting her steps. Lucas watched the front door camera, unblinking. Time dragged, stretched thin enough to snap. The minute hand crawled. 10:59. Lucas's breath came shallow now, measured, silent. Whatever was going to happen, whatever Emma had felt, whatever Constance had seeded into this house, it was close. The quiet deepened, and midnight was almost here. Chapter 6, 11:00 p.m. The clock on Lucas's tablet flipped from 10:59 to 11:00. At the exact moment the numbers changed, the front door camera adjusted automatically for low light, and headlights swept across the driveway. Lucas's breath caught. The beams cut through the darkness in a slow arc, illuminating the familiar shape of the mailbox, the edge of the lawn, the front steps. A car rolled to a stop where no car should have been. Not a neighbor, not a delivery. Too deliberate, too late. Lucas leaned forward until his face was inches from the screen. The engine shut off. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. Constance stepped out. She was dressed differently than usual, dark coat, hair pulled back tight, movements brisk and efficient. No lingering, no hesitation. She circled the car and opened the rear door. Two men got out. Lucas's stomach dropped. They were strangers. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Both dressed plainly, jackets, jeans, nothing flashy. One of them scanned the street before shutting the door quietly. The other adjusted something at his waist, hidden by the coat. They didn't look confused. They didn't look lost. They looked expected. Lucas's pulse thundered in his ears as he flicked to the living room camera. Deborah appeared in frame almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting just out of sight. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look alarmed. She walked straight to the door. "Don't," Lucas whispered under his breath, knowing no one could hear him. Deborah unlocked the deadbolt. The door opened. Constance stepped inside without a word, brushing past Deborah like she owned the space. The two men followed, quiet and efficient, eyes already mapping the room. Deborah closed the door behind them and locked it. Once, then again. Lucas felt cold spread through his chest. He watched Deborah's face carefully, searching for doubt, fear, anything that might suggest this was a misunderstanding. There was nothing. She spoke, but the cameras didn't carry sound. Lucas could only read her mouth. "You're on time," Constance replied, lips barely moving. "Of course." One of the men glanced down the hallway. Lucas switched feeds, heart hammering. Hallway camera. Clear view. The men stood shoulder to shoulder now, Constance slightly ahead, Deborah lingering behind them. Constance lifted one hand and pointed straight down the hall, toward Emma's room. Lucas's hands curled into fists. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." The group began to move. Their footsteps were silent on the feed, but Lucas imagined them, soft, measured, practiced, not rushed, not uncertain, purposeful. Deborah followed a few steps behind, wringing her hands together. She looked smaller now, almost diminished next to the others, but she didn't stop them. She didn't call out. She didn't turn back. Lucas's vision tunneled. He flicked to the camera outside Emma's room. The door was closed. Light spilled faintly from beneath it. Emma was inside, asleep, alone. The men stopped at the end of the hallway. Constance leaned toward them, speaking low. One man nodded once. The other glanced over his shoulder, checking behind them. Constance's mouth formed words Lucas wished he couldn't read. Quiet. No mistakes. Deborah hesitated. She said something short, sharp. "Is this necessary?" Constance turned on her instantly. Even without sound, Lucas could see the reprimand in her posture, the rigid authority. Deborah wilted. She nodded. Lucas felt something inside him snap. Not loudly, not explosively, but cleanly, like a switch flipping from doubt to certainty. This wasn't fear anymore. This was confirmation. He zoomed in on the men. One of them slipped on thin gloves, tugging them tight. The other adjusted his jacket again, checking whatever he carried beneath it. Lucas's thoughts raced, but his body went still, the way it always had when the moment finally arrived. This was real. This was planned. This was happening because he wasn't supposed to be here. The hallway camera caught movement again as Constance advanced. She walked as if she'd done this before, steps light, confident. She stopped directly outside Emma's door. She raised her hand, paused. Lucas's heart slammed against his ribs. Deborah stood back, eyes fixed on the floor. The men positioned themselves on either side of the doorway, blocking the hall like sentries. Constance turned her head slightly, said something to Deborah without looking at her. Deborah nodded again. Lucas's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He checked the basement door instinctively, even though he knew it was secure. He checked his phone. No messages. No calls. Upstairs, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Constance reached for the doorknob. Lucas's hand moved on its own, gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles burned. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to act, to burst from the shadows and end this now. But another instinct, older, colder, held him in place. Watch. Confirm. Know everything. The doorknob turned. Just a fraction. Lucas's vision blurred at the edges. The men leaned in, ready. Constance's lips curved just barely. And in that single, terrible moment, watching strangers stand outside his daughter's bedroom while his wife and her mother made space for them, Lucas understood the truth in full, horrifying clarity. There was no mistake, no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation waiting to be uncovered. This was his worst fear made real, and it was unfolding right outside Emma's door. Chapter 7, The Hallway. Lucas moved before his mind could catch up. The moment Constance's fingers tightened on Emma's doorknob, he was already climbing the basement stairs, every step silent, every breath controlled. Years of training stripped him down to function. Fear was still there, white-hot and feral, but it sat behind discipline now, contained just enough to be useful. He reached the top of the stairs and killed the lights. The hallway lay ahead, dim except for the soft glow bleeding from beneath Emma's door. Shadows clung to the walls. The air felt thick, charged. Constance stood closest to the door. The two men flanked it. Deborah hovered behind them, hands clenched together, eyes darting like a trapped animal's. Lucas stepped forward. "Take your hands off that door." His voice cut through the hallway like a blade. Constance froze. One of the men spun around. The other cursed under his breath. Deborah gasped sharply, stumbling back a step. Lucas emerged fully into the light, shoulders squared, stance wide and grounded. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "What were you doing here?" Deborah whispered. Lucas didn't look at her. He looked at the men. "Evan Marks," he said calmly, nodding toward the taller one. "And Tyler Boone. You're late." Both men went pale. "How do you know our names?" Boone snapped, hand twitching near his jacket. Lucas smiled without warmth. "Because you're sloppy, and because you picked the wrong house." Constance recovered first. She always did. Her lips curved into a thin, controlled smile. "Lucas," she said smoothly, as if he'd walked in on a dinner party instead of nightmare. "This isn't what it looks like." "Step away from my daughter's door," Lucas said. "This doesn't concern you," Constance replied. Lucas took one slow step forward. "Everything in this house concerns me." Marks glanced over his shoulder. "Constance, you said he'd be gone." "I was," Lucas said. "That was the plan." Deborah shook her head, tears spilling now. "Lucas, please, don't," Lucas said quietly. He finally turned to her. "Not yet." He looked back at the men. Front doors locked. Back gate secured. And my brother's sitting a car 2 blocks away watching the street. "You try to run, you won't get far." Boone's breathing quickened. "This is bullshit." "Is it?" Lucas asked. "Check your phone." No signal. Jammer's cheap, but effective. Boone reached for his pocket anyway. His face drained when the screen lit up with nothing but no service. Mark swore again. "You said this was clean." It was Constance snapped. Until he interfered. Lucas's gaze snapped back to her. "You planned this." Constance met his stare without flinching. "I arranged an opportunity. You tried to sell my child." Deborah made a broken sound. "It wasn't like that." Lucas turned on her then, eyes burning. "Then tell me what it was." She opened her mouth, closed it. Her shoulders sagged. Constance scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. No one was being sold." "Then explain why 2 men I've tied to shell companies and offshore transfers are standing outside my daughter's bedroom at 11 o'clock at night," Lucas said. Mark stiffened. "You're in a background check on us?" Lucas nodded. "Among other things." The hallway felt smaller now. The walls seemed to press in as the truth crowded the air. Deborah slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, face buried in her hands. "I didn't know what else to do," she sobbed. Lucas's voice dropped. "Do what?" She looked up at him, eyes red and wild. "We're drowning, Lucas. The credit cards. The loans." Mom said she had connections. That it was temporary. "Temporary," Lucas repeated. Constance rolled her eyes. "You're making this sound ugly." "It is ugly," Lucas said. "Say it." Constance's smile hardened. "Fine. We had clients." Marks shifted uncomfortably. Boone swallowed. "Families," Constance continued. "Wealthy. Powerful. People who value discretion. They want access. Influence. The children are well taken care of." Lucas felt something dark coil in his chest. "You're talking about trafficking," he said. Constance shrugged. "I prefer the term exclusive childcare." Deborah cried out. "You said it was just guardianship. Boarding schools. Scholarships." Constance turned on her. "I said what you needed to hear." Lucas stared at his wife. "You believed her." "I didn't want to lose the house," Deborah whispered. "I didn't want to lose everything." "So, you were willing to lose Emma?" Lucas asked. Deborah broke completely then, sobbing openly. "I thought," she said, "it would only be for a while. That she'd be safe." Lucas's hands curled in a fist, so tight his nails bit into his palms. Mark spoke up, voice shaky. "Look, man, we can walk away. No harm done. Lucas looked at him slowly. You were about to open her door. Boone backed up a step. We didn't touch her. You were going to, Lucas said, and you won't ever get the chance. Constance stepped forward, eyes blazing. You don't understand the kind of people involved. Lucas stepped closer, invading her space. I understand, monsters. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across her face. This ends now, Lucas said. You don't take another step. You don't touch another door. And you tell me everything. Marks exhaled sharply. Constance, this wasn't the deal. She glared at him. Shut up. No, Lucas said. He can talk. Mark swallowed. It's a network. Different states. Different houses. She finds the kids. We move them. Lucas's vision tunneled. How many, he asked. Marks hesitated. How many? Lucas repeated, voice deadly calm. Marks looked away. Enough. Deborah let out a strangled scream. Lucas stood in the middle of the hallway, between his daughter's door and the people who'd tried to cross that line, and felt the last shred of doubt burn away. The truth had surfaced, and there was no turning back now. Chapter 8, No Way Out. The moment Boone's hand slid toward the waistband of his jacket, Lucas's body moved before his mind even registered the threat. Years of training, years of muscle memory burned into his bones during night patrols and live-fire exercises took over. He stepped forward, closing the small gap in an instant. His hand shot out, catching Boone's wrist mid-motion and twisting sharply. Boone's fingers loosened, and a small, cold piece of metal fell with a metallic clink onto the hardwood floor. Boone staggered back, clutching his wrist, shock crossing his features. Marks froze, his face pale as he realized what had just happened. Lucas didn't hesitate. He pressed Boone against the wall, using his weight and leverage to pin him, muscles coiled like springs. Stay still, Lucas said quietly but firmly. You're done here. Constance's lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. She was used to control, used to having others obey her without question. Now she was watching her carefully orchestrated plan unravel in real time. Deborah stumbled back, hands pressed to her mouth. Lucas, please, she whispered. Don't hurt them. Lucas's eyes didn't leave the men. I'm not hurting anyone, he said, but you're not leaving either. The sound of a car, doors slamming outside, drew Lucas's attention for a brief second. He didn't need to ask. Instinct told him exactly who it was. Scott, he murmured, relieved but still tense. The front door burst open moments later, and Scott Nicholson stepped inside, the familiar calm and solid presence of his brother anchoring Lucas's resolve. Got your call, Scott said, eyes scanning the hallway instantly. Lucas nodded. Perfect timing. Scott moved into position, blocking the main entrance. Police are on their way, he said casually, but every muscle in his body was ready. Boone struggled against Lucas's grip, finally letting out a frustrated shout. You've got no proof, he barked. Nothing. We can walk out of here right now. Lucas tightened his hold slightly, his voice low and steady. Not tonight. Not this house. Not my daughter. Marks glanced nervously at Constance, as if seeking guidance. She opened her mouth to speak, but closed it again. Even she understood the situation had spiraled beyond repair. Lucas's attention shifted to Emma's door. He could hear her shallow, uneven breaths beneath the closed door. Her small hands gripped her rabbit so tightly it made her knuckles white. Every second of delay felt like a lifetime. He moved first, stepping quickly to the door and gently pushing it open. Emma recoiled slightly at the sudden movement, but when she saw him, her wide eyes filled with relief. Daddy, she whispered. Lucas knelt instantly. Hey, baby girl. It's okay. You're safe, he said, lifting her into his arms. She clung to him as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. Deborah sobbed quietly behind him. Lucas, not now, Lucas said, focusing entirely on securing the threat. He turned back to the men, who were now visibly panicking. Scott moved to flank Marks, keeping him contained. Lucas adjusted Boone against the wall, controlling his arms with precise marine technique, leaving Boone little room to maneuver. You should have stayed away, Lucas said evenly, voice low and hard. Now look where it's gotten you. Boone's face twisted with fury. You think you're a hero? He spat. No, Lucas said. I know I am your worst nightmare. The tension in the hallway crackled. Every breath, every flick of movement amplified the stakes. Outside, the sound of sirens drew closer. Emma pressed her face into Lucas's shoulder, trembling, but safe. Constance finally broke the silence. Lucas, you can't. This isn't over. You don't know what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Lucas replied. And it ends tonight. You won't touch my daughter. Deborah sank to the floor again, overwhelmed. Lucas glanced at her, the betrayal cutting deep. She had helped orchestrate this, whether willingly or under pressure, but there was no denying it anymore. The evidence of intent was right here, frozen in the hall, as tangible as the fear he had carried for months. The wail of sirens outside grew louder. Marks and Boone exchanged panicked glances, realizing they were trapped. Their control was gone. The meticulous plan they'd rehearsed, the timing, the secrecy, all crumbling. Scott tightened his stance, arms ready to intervene if the men tried anything desperate. It's over, he said plainly. Just stay still. Boone glared at Lucas, but the fight had drained from him. Marks followed suit, leaning back against the wall. Even Constance seemed momentarily frozen, the weight of failure settling on her like a physical force. Lucas released Boone's arm slightly, just enough to signal dominance without unnecessary harm. You're not going anywhere, he said, and you'll explain everything to the authorities when they arrive. Emma whispered, Daddy, they're scary. Lucas kissed the top of her head, steadying her with one hand. I know, baby, but you're safe now. I got you. Outside, headlights reflected off the hallway mirrors as the police cars arrived. Officers poured out, uniforms crisp, voices commanding. Lucas stepped aside, letting them take control, but he stayed close, eyes never leaving the restrained men. One officer approached Boone and Marks, reading their rights aloud. Another checked Constance, who suddenly tried to collect herself, putting on a thin veneer of composure. Lucas knelt beside Emma, brushing strands of hair from her face. See? Nothing's wrong, he said softly. We're okay. Deborah was seated on the floor, guarded by a female officer, her face streaked with tears. Lucas could hardly process it. The betrayal, the fear, the near loss of his daughter all folded into one chaotic moment. Scott clapped him on the shoulder. Nice work, he said quietly. You kept your cool. Lucas didn't respond immediately. He watched as the men were handcuffed and let out. Constance's mouth moved, probably arguing, probably denying. Lucas didn't care. The damage was done. He turned back to Emma, holding her tight. She sniffled, burying her face into his chest, and he felt every ounce of tension leave her body slowly. Finally, Lucas allowed himself a slow exhale. His daughter was safe. She hadn't been touched. She hadn't been harmed. But the truth remained stark and undeniable. Deborah had been complicit. Constance had orchestrated the operation. And without his intervention tonight, Emma would have been taken. Lucas tightened his hold on her and whispered, almost to himself, never again. For the first time that night, he allowed the raw, unfiltered relief to mingle with the simmering anger and betrayal churning inside him. The intruders were restrained. Emma was safe. The nightmare, at least for this night, had ended, and the betrayal was complete and undeniable. Chapter 9, Justice and Consequences. The sun rose pale and indifferent to morning after the chaos. Lucas sat in his living room, Emma curled against him on the couch, the faint hum of the police radio in the background still buzzing through his mind. He let her rest there, small and fragile yet unbroken, while he finally allowed himself to process the events of the night. His phone buzzed with notifications, emails from federal agents, messages from Scott, and the first digital confirmations that the surveillance footage had been secured. Every angle of the house, every movement captured on camera, every word spoken during the confrontation upstairs was now evidence. Evidence of intent. Evidence of betrayal. Evidence of danger. Lucas didn't need to watch it again to know the story it told. The clarity of that hallway, the confrontation, the men standing poised outside Emma's door, it would be enough to unravel the network and keep his daughter safe. But he spent the morning reviewing it anyway, frame by frame, sound muted, fingers tightening and relaxing over each key press. By late morning, federal authorities were at the door. Their arrival was methodical, professional, and uncompromising. Lucas handed them the files he had meticulously compiled. Surveillance footage, research into Constance's known associates, offshore accounts, shell companies. All of it tied back to the woman who had once smiled at him across family dinners, now revealed as the mastermind of a child trafficking operation spanning multiple states. Agent Reynolds, the lead investigator, glanced at him briefly before focusing on a laptop. "This is thorough," he said, voice low, almost surgical. Lucas nodded. "I had help from someone who's seen these kinds of people before," he said, referring subtly to Scott. "And I wasn't leaving my daughter unprotected." Reynolds didn't press. He understood the sentiment. Not all protection came from uniformed officers. Some had to come from fathers who refused to trust anyone else with their children's lives. By noon, Deborah was formally arrested for conspiracy. She didn't resist. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as officers read her rights. Lucas didn't look directly at her. He didn't need to. The betrayal had already settled deep within him. Words were unnecessary. Her actions had spoken for her. He watched from the living room window as the officers led her to the car. She glanced back briefly, but there was no apology in her eyes, only resignation. The resignation of someone who knew the law would punish them. But the weight of conscience was an entirely different sentence. Lucas didn't pity her. There was no room for that, not after what she'd allowed. The divorce followed swiftly. Legal counsel worked efficiently, and Lucas ensured Emma's custody was unquestioned. Court-appointed child advocates observed his interactions with his daughter, noting the careful balance of love and vigilance he displayed. By the time the legal documents were finalized, Lucas and Emma were free to start again. The weight of Deborah's betrayal formally lifted from their home. Meanwhile, federal authorities moved with the precision of a military operation. Teams swept through the network's properties, gathering evidence, securing witnesses, and arresting Constance's accomplices. Every name Lucas had uncovered, every lead painstakingly tracked, led to dismantling the network piece by piece. The operation spanned weeks, but it was systematic, almost surgical, and Lucas remained in close contact with Agent Reynolds, offering insight into the patterns of behavior, the methods of concealment, and the predictable arrogance of Constance's inner circle. Constance herself was apprehended in a gated property miles from a city. Her expression as she was handcuffed was still composed, still calculating, but her empire had crumbled beneath her. Lucas watched the news reports with a cold sense of satisfaction. Federal authorities had dismantled her operation. Her co-conspirators faced long prison sentences. Deborah, with incontrovertible evidence of her willing participation, also faced the consequences. Lucas didn't celebrate. Not loudly. He didn't make speeches or announce victory. There was nothing triumphant about this. It was justice in its clinical, unflinching form, the kind that left scars even when it delivered protection. Still, he allowed himself a small exhale, the first in days, and glanced down at Emma. She was coloring quietly, her small hands steady, her expression peaceful. That peace was a victory enough. But the legal system, Lucas knew, was only part of the equation. The kind of people who trafficked children, who manipulated family and trust for profit and control, often survived prison walls. They adapted. They found ways to claw power, even in confinement. And Lucas had spent too long relying solely on formal justice to believe that it would be sufficient. He made a few discreet calls over the following weeks, connecting with old contacts from his Marine days, men who understood subtlety, influence, and pressure. The goal wasn't violence, it never was, but the message had to be unambiguous. Those who preyed on children would no longer find comfort in any corner of the world, even behind bars. Word of reputations, influence, and consequences traveled fast in certain networks. Those who had terrorized innocent children now faced a reality that was as inescapable as the law itself. Lucas didn't announce these actions. He didn't brag, and he certainly didn't tell Emma. She needed her father present, consistent, a shield rather than a storm. Every move he made behind the scenes was invisible to her, yet reinforced the protective perimeter around her life. Legal justice had contained the threat externally. Lucas's measures ensured it remained constrained internally. Evenings in the house regained a slow rhythm. Emma's laughter returned in small bursts, initially tentative, then more confident. Lucas watched her closely, noting the subtle reclaiming of her sense of security, how she no longer flinched when footsteps approached the hallway, how she no longer hesitated when opening doors, how her eyes no longer darted toward shadows. In the quiet moments, Lucas reflected on the scope of the danger they had survived. The betrayal, the planning, the calculated execution, it had been real, and he had been ready. Every surveillance camera, every precaution, every lie told to maintain the illusion of his departure had been worth it. The stakes had been the highest possible, and they had prevailed. Yet even in victory, Lucas understood the permanence of vigilance. The world was full of predators, many of whom never wore their faces openly. Constance and her network were gone, but the lesson was indelible. Trust had limits. Loyalty could be manipulated, and love, the fierce, unyielding love for his daughter, would always demand action beyond what the law alone could provide. The house felt lighter now, but not empty. Lucas maintained his watch. Evenings spent reading homework or helping with drawings were interspersed with brief moments checking surveillance, reviewing reports, ensuring nothing had been overlooked. These routines were quiet, almost imperceptible, but they were the threads that wove their safety into the fabric of their daily lives. One evening, as Emma slept and the house settled into silence, Lucas leaned back in the chair at the head of the living room, hands folded across his chest. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself a rare reflection on the path that had brought them here. The legal system had delivered judgment. Federal authorities had dismantled the network. His family was formally safe, but his own efforts, discreet and deliberate, ensured the protection would last long after courtrooms and police stations had faded into history. The perpetrators would learn consequences that extended beyond law books, into the harsh reality of the world they had tried to manipulate. The final protection, the one no court could guarantee, was in place. And Lucas, watching the monitors one last time before shutting them down for the night, allowed himself a quiet, controlled satisfaction. Emma was safe. The law had acted. The network was gone. And the people who had tried to harm them would now face consequences that could not be appealed, denied, or ignored. Justice had been served. But protection, Lucas knew, was eternal and uncompromising. Chapter 10. Listening saved her life. The moving truck rumbled away in the late afternoon sun, leaving behind a quiet street and a house that felt entirely new. Lucas stood on the porch of their new home, Emma's small hand curled tightly in his, and watched the last crate disappear down the road. The scent of fresh paint and newly cut grass filled the air, mingling with a strange sense of both relief and cautious hope. Emma shifted beside him, tugging at his sleeve. "Daddy, is this really ours?" she asked, eyes wide as if afraid the answer could change. Lucas crouched, meeting her gaze. "It's ours, kiddo. A fresh start. Just you and me." She smiled faintly, holding on to that truth like a lifeline. "I like it," she said softly, her voice fragile but determined. I think I'm going to like it a lot." Lucas let out a slow breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease just a fraction. It was hard to believe, after the months of fear, deception, and betrayal, that they had arrived here, safe, together, and free from the shadows of the past. But Lucas knew safety wasn't something he could ever take for granted. It had to be built piece by piece, moment by moment. Inside, the house smelled like new beginnings. Clean wood floors, freshly painted walls, and the faint lingering scent of furniture polish. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, still taped, still waiting. Lucas led Emma through the rooms, letting her choose where her bed would go, where her desk would stand, and even which stuffed animals would remain unpacked in the first wave. "This is mine," she said, pointing to the corner of a sunny room, "and I want my bunny right here." Lucas chuckled softly, setting her rabbit down on the floor where the sunlight pooled. "Perfect spot," he said, "right next to the window, so you can see the sky when you wake up." Emma's smile was genuine this time, unshadowed by fear. It warmed Lucas more than he expected. He realized then that the therapy sessions she had begun were slowly helping her heal, not just from the trauma of that night, but from the months of subtle fear she had endured before he even knew the full truth. Therapy was new for both of them. Lucas had insisted she meet with a child psychologist trained in trauma, someone gentle but firm. Emma had been hesitant at first, unsure of strangers, wary of even speaking her fears aloud. But slowly, the girl who had whispered warnings in the hallway, the child whose instincts had saved her life, began to open up. She drew pictures, told stories, and eventually, with small but confident steps, named her fears. "Sometimes I still get scared," Emma confessed one evening, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor with crayons scattered around her. "I think about you not being here." Lucas knelt beside her, heart tightening. "I know, baby girl, but I promise you I'll always be here. Always." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face as if trying to measure the truth in his words. "And if something bad comes, you'll stop it?" Lucas smiled, though it was tinged with sadness and steel. "I always will. That's my job." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Slowly, life returned to something resembling normalcy. Emma's laughter began to fill the new rooms, tentative at first, then bold and bright. She walked the streets of their neighborhood with Lucas, holding his hand tight, scanning the sidewalks and trees, not with fear, but with curiosity. They discovered parks, cafes, and playgrounds that became their routine escapes. Each small adventure rebuilt her trust in the world and in her father's protection. Lucas, for his part, remained vigilant. Even in the quiet moments, his marine instincts lingered. Surveillance and awareness were subtle now, more about understanding patterns than anticipating imminent threats, but he never let his guard drop completely. It was a small price to pay for Emma's sense of security. 1 year later, the house had truly become a home. Balloons dotted the living room, and a banner hung across the wall. "Happy 8th birthday, Emma." The scent of chocolate cake mingled with fresh flowers, filling the space with warmth and normalcy. Friends from school, neighbors, and family, carefully vetted, buzzed around, bringing gifts and laughter. Lucas watched Emma as she tore open wrapping paper, her face lighting up with every small discovery. Dolls, books, a new bicycle. Each gift was met with joy and curiosity. For a moment, the horrors of the previous year seemed impossibly distant. Emma paused, holding a small figurine, and looked at Lucas. "Daddy," she said softly, "I'm really happy." "You deserve it, kiddo," Lucas replied, voice steady but thick with emotion. "You've earned every bit of it." She ran over and hugged him tightly. Lucas held her, feeling the weight of all they had survived. He let himself reflect, not on the terror, not on the betrayal, but on the instinct that had guided him. Her warning, whispered months before, had been the first thread in a chain that saved her life. Listening had made all the difference. Lucas stepped back slightly, brushing her hair from her face. "You know, Emma, you were right," he said quietly. "You said something bad would happen when I was gone, and you were the one who made sure we stopped it." Emma smiled, small but confident, as if accepting a truth she had always known. "I just knew," she said. "I didn't know why, but I knew." Lucas watched her, heart swelling. He realized that protecting her had required more than just quick action and careful planning. It had required ruthlessness, decisiveness, and a willingness to act when others doubted him. He had crossed lines he would never have imagined, but every choice had been necessary. Every action had kept her alive. He glanced around the room, at the bright balloons, the half-eaten cake, the presents stacked neatly in corners, and the faces of children laughing and playing. Emma's safety and happiness were visible here, tangible in every smile and squeal. The past year's terror could not touch them here. And yet, Lucas understood that vigilance was never complete. Shadows remained, faint but persistent, in the corners of the mind. He accepted it. He had no illusions about the world. There were threats out there, dangers that would never entirely disappear. But now, he had something stronger than fear. He had proof that acting, trusting instincts, and listening could prevent tragedy. As Emma blew out the candles on her cake, Lucas whispered softly, almost to himself, "I'd do it all again. Every step, every choice, every lie, and every secret. Protecting you, that's all that matters." Emma looked at him with her big, honest eyes, not fully understanding the weight of his words, but sensing the steadfast love behind them. She reached up and hugged him again, the small arms wrapped around his neck, grounding him more than anything else ever could. Lucas held her tight, feeling both the fragility and the resilience of life, realizing that all the fear, all the danger, all the sleepless nights had culminated in this single, irreplaceable truth. Listening to her, believing her, trusting her instincts that had saved her life. The living room was alive with laughter and warmth. Yet Lucas's gaze lingered on Emma, who was already examining her new toys with the careful curiosity only a survivor could have. A quiet pride swelled in him, accompanied by the knowledge that his actions, ruthless though they had built a shield around the most important thing in his world. And in that moment, Lucas Nicholson understood, more clearly than ever, that no law, no system, no outside force could offer the kind of protection a father could give when he listened, acted, and refused to turn away. He would do it all again, without hesitation, without fear, because protecting his child mattered more than anything else. And this time, he could watch her grow, smile, and thrive safely, knowing he had answered the warning that once whispered in a small voice. "Daddy, something bad happens when you're gone."